Just in terms of Thank you. Just in terms of a quick agenda for today, so we're going to begin with a quick round of introductions and then look to set the scene in terms of what can actually cause slow or failed CLM projects. That's contract lifecycle management projects. We're going to run through a bit of preparation to make sure how your implementation on these projects can be as efficient as possible. We're going to cover some commonly missed areas, and these will be really key, particularly the power of a pilot period. And then finally, we'll run through some questions from our audience. And the lovely Molly and Nicole will also be able to help in and provide some feedback and some answers there, as Dave also been through a similar journey. Just in terms of a quick introduction, both to Summize and for today's speakers, I'm Thomas Pratt. I'm our legal counsel and pre-sales consultant here at Summize. So I've been in the CLM space and with Summize ourselves for just over 4 years now. Helped implement and discuss CLM projects with customers of all different shapes and sizes and sectors and industries as well. And I'm joined by the lovely legal team over at ProsperOps. So Molly, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Hi, my name is Molly Campbell. I'm the Director of Legal at ProsperOps. And as you could probably tell, we are pretty adamant users of Summize. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Hi, I'm Nicole Chamberlain, VP of Legal at ProsperOps, and we are joined to share our experience with the CLM implementation, and we do use Summize, and we love it.
Thank you both. Molly and Nicole have amazing experience, not just going through the sales cycle of a CLM implementation and going through those difficult navigations of features and consulting different groups to get the buy-in during a CLM project, but also then the implementation phase and ensuring that they avoided some of the pitfalls that we'll be talking through today and also helping to get that wider team buy-in as well. So, Summize as well, who are we? We are a leading contract lifecycle management solution based in Boston, San Diego, where we are today, and then also in Manchester in the UK as well. We're a decentralized CLM solution, so that means that we actually integrate our software directly into the business tools that you're using every day. And you can see some of those fancy logos on the screen there. So whether that's Outlook or Gmail, Teams, Slack, your CRM, and then also e-signature tools as well. The reason that we actually take this approach and sort of our ICP compared to the market is that we actually want to keep users where they're already operating. We find that business end users are always switching between different tools, and we don't want to actually have to introduce them to yet another tool to go and use. So that's why we meet them where they work, helps massively with adoption and doesn't disrupt their existing ways of working as well. Through this approach, we look to actually prioritize adoption, just like I mentioned, and help create contract clarity across the company. We do this through our embedded integrations. We also actually take a self-service approach to contracting. So your sales teams, procurement, HR, or finance can also self-serve to a certain extent on lower risk contracts. And we'll touch on that slightly later as well. We have really powerful AI functionality across the entire contract lifecycle, and that really helps legal teams to focus more on strategic work, while AI helps with that lower value, more manual, time-consuming tasks. And finally, we also have a really strong implementation and rollout, which obviously Molly and Nicole will be able to speak to in some detail as well, share their experience. We predominantly take a sprint-based approach, and that means that a lot of our customers actually see time to value within as little as 4 to 6 weeks as well. So not having to wait until the whole tool is implemented and rolled out to actually start achieving value with them as well. Now we're going to start with a quick survey, and we'd really like your participation in this, just to get a bit of an idea and an understanding as to where your organization actually is on their CLM journey. Very much appreciate that a lot of you may have never used CLM before, maybe you've implemented some previously, maybe you're going through an implementation right now, but really useful to get your feedback, and hopefully we can also help cover off any questions that come up through the chat. I'll just give you 15 or 20 seconds to complete that, and then we can review some of the answers. Perfect. I can see we're starting to get some answers coming through. Great. If we could just wrap that poll up, then we can start to go through some of the answers, hopefully. Amazing. So quite a lot of today's audience haven't yet undertook a CLM project, still considering their options. We've also got quite a few that are all ready and still going through their implementation process. So hopefully this will give you a few tidbits for how to best manage that rollout and adoption phase as well. We know that that is a really critical part of any sort of CLM and software project in general, but we'll also go through some preparation pieces as well in terms of if you've not yet brought a CLM on board, what you can be considering, pieces you can do to also make that implementation phase a little bit easier when it comes across as well. Perfect, thank you. So what can actually cause a slow or failed CLM project? Now, there's a few different pieces here as to why tech projects aren't as successful as a lot of businesses may hope. A lot of these challenges aren't unique to CLM world as well. We should say a lot of tech projects in general also have these issues. But when we've actually spoke to legal teams who come to us to sort of reignite those CLM projects, we find that there's been previously quite a few different experiences that center mainly around the 4 different themes that we've got on screen today. So first of all, assuming technology is the silver bullet to fix all your problems. I think something that's really key when it comes to these projects is identifying those key problems that you're looking to solve right away and maybe orientating that search around it. Having unclear ownership and expectations on the business side, not considering actually running through a detailed proof of concept, and then also treating rollout and user adoption almost as an afterthought and not preparing for it properly. Nicole, Molly, it's a great time to hear from you both, I think, in your experiences. I think maybe if we take that first piece, so assuming technology is that silver bullet, how did you both go into the CLM project and how did you consider your specific needs when looking for a CLM?
I think that our contracting structure just generally is fairly unique. It's not just, a standard SaaS agreement with license and subscription model. And so I don't think there was any point where we necessarily thought that the technology was going to fix anything, which was probably a wise way to come into the process. But yeah, I think that we really had sort of a detailed view of these are the most important things to us, and then looking for technology that could address the most important things in the best way, and then learning to live with maybe what it didn't address.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I started looking at CLMs as a solo, the only lawyer at Prosper Ops. And that was just, look, we were like creating our customer contracts from Google Docs in a shared folder, and people were grabbing the wrong stuff. Yeah, I was having to review stuff via like getting, legal requests via various tools, Slack, email, Zoom calls, drive-bys, if you will, when you're fully remote, the drive-by via a Zoom call. And so just knowing like what did we really need to, what were like our priorities, and finding a CLM that was just knocking it out of the park on those things. Like not there's no CLM that's going to do everything wonderfully and like perfect. So it's like what's most important to you, and find the CLM that does like those key things really, really, really well.
Yeah, I think they're both great points. In terms of actually putting together that prioritized list of use cases that you were looking to solve and things like that, how did you go across maybe prioritizing them?
I think it was kind of like, where did we feel the most pain in the day to day? Like manual drafting of contracts to go to customers, having to
Mm.
check those, seeing errors, and knowing that like a tool where sales or whoever can self-service contract creation within, you know, the right template guidelines, question if this, then that. It's really great. It takes 5 minutes instead of it taking 30 minutes. And then knowing what we had agreed to, I joined the company at about 5 years in, and our founders are like super organized. all the contracts were saved in one spot, but it was just knowing what was in the contracts, what commitments had been made, making sure we're complying with contracts. So the repository was also super important for me because they would ask me, when's this, what are renewals in the next month? I'm like, I don't know, and a CLM helps with that, right? It's tracking your deadlines and sending you reminders 90 days before contract's up for renewal. So those were the biggest for me. Like those were pain points I was feeling on a daily basis. And so being able to solve those was definitely top priority.
I
Yeah,
was
and I
also
guess go on, sorry, Molly.
I was also new to the company, and so when I started, it was, before I was going to be able to ramp up and really help much on, the actual legal operations side. It was more of, anytime you have a fresh perspective, I was so new to be able to say like, oh, I wonder why we aren't doing it this way, or why
Mm.
if this would be a smoother process. And so that was a very easy transition to then have Nicole say, run with the CLM. And so to the next point of like unclear ownership and expectations, it was pretty clear that while Nicole handled literally every contract negotiation, this was my job, which allowed me, A, to learn a lot about, honestly, our contracts, our commitments. It was sort of like a really good playbook for me to learn, hey, these are our, risk appetites and thresholds. Um, but also like thinking in a fresh perspective of, Nicole is doing this day after day, day in and day out, and me coming with more, newer to it, thinking, oh, well, maybe we could do it this way and aligning that with the CLM search.
Yeah, it's a great piece that you mentioned, almost reviewing your business processes and contracting processes, and as you mentioned, where things are, your templates, etc., ahead of that stage of bringing on a CLM, because it sounds like that really enabled you to almost hone in on, okay, where are the inefficiencies, what are our business priorities, and what's maybe the impact that they're having downstream as well, because we don't maybe have this in place, and then prioritizing it. I know that both of you ran a really detailed proof of concept when you're actually evaluating different vendors and actually looking at which solution would fit both of your and ProsperOps' needs most. How did you go about, I guess, the learning curve in terms of understanding what was out there, and then also making sure that the vendor you did end up choosing, being us, was going to fit you best?
Nicole brought up a good point that, any CLM is going to do a great job with like a standard NDA, right? This is what you're going to see in a demo. And so I think that the most important thing for our proof of concept was to give Tom our really difficult contracts and say, make this work within Summize. And trying to give the POC those more, I mean, we weren't doing a simple NDA. Obviously, we did that, but we were doing, very inapplicable contracts and seeing how that would work within how would it capture, the clause summaries and stuff on something that was very unfamiliar to the tool. Um, so I think that doing the proof of concept in a way that, yes, tests what you do on a day-to-day basis, but also how is it going to test things that aren't so easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and doing POCs and kind of not just doing that on the NDA, to Molly's point, like having that POC, and we did multiple POCs with various vendors to say like who can work with our unique contracting structure, which of these summaries, the clause summaries, is pulling just not your standard language that you see in every contract, but some that vary like company product specific terms. Is it recognizing that? How quickly can you train it to? So I think doing POCs, and Molly, when I hired her, she helped a ton on day-to-day stuff, but also this was like she owned CLM. I mean, there was no fogginess as to who owned it and she knocked it out of the park. But I mean, she did it so many demos. We did great POCs. And I think having that very clear ownership and then doing really thorough POCs, maybe we were even a little bit annoying at what we required and demanded, but I think it helped us see in the tools where something might not work great. Could we live with that or not? It really, we knew what we were going to be signing up for, and we're able to make like a very well educated decision on when we selected our vendor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I sort of took away and when we were running through the actual POC process together was just how almost in the weeds and testing edge cases, etc. you guys were, which I think is great because as everyone sort of knows, not everything always goes down that happy path, if you like, in terms of this contract's going to just be drafted and that'll maybe get signed without negotiation, or this data point that we need to map in from our CRM, how's that going to look like within our order form, for example. So making sure that you actually ran through and made sure for your biggest priority use cases and the biggest pain points you're actually looking to address, could we comprehensively manage that? And again, when things come up that maybe aren't working exactly as you'd like them to, or when you're working through those processes of the different edge cases, understanding how we can accommodate them and fit them into your workflow as well, which I think was really important.
Yeah.
I know, obviously, both of you did set aside a fair amount of time to actually do this. Are there any advice that you would maybe give to any of the participants about managing that alongside your day-to-day and maybe that ownership piece as well?
I will be honest, it was a lot of work. I mean, to Nicole's point, she tried to, evaluate POCs before I came on board, and it's just too much to get a CLM in place while also being the only attorney at a very fast-growing company. I mean, selfishly, it was super helpful for me that this was pretty much my full-time job, because as we were building out, when we did the export of all of the contracts and decided this was a really good time to make sure that there is a naming convention across the board, it was actually a really good opportunity for me to, I mean, we were a smaller company, so we were moving over, I think, like 1,000 contracts. And so I had my eyes on every single one of those contracts to determine what should the proper name of this be, when was it executed, things like that. And it gave me the opportunity to really look at every single contract that we had. So it was a learning opportunity that definitely paid off. But I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think if you do it correctly, it is a lot of work. But I think that we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think that doing it right from the outset and putting a lot of time into it really saves you time on the actual implementation stage, because there wasn't the afterthought of, oh shoot, we should rename everything now that it's in the repository. Oh shoot, our AEs can't find what they need because it's named incorrectly, or we didn't really think through what our folder structure should look like, things like that. We were pretty tedious about it. And I do think that although it felt like it took a long time to make that happen, it's paid off on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common theme that we'll see today is not only on the pre-sales and making that vendor decision, but also on the implementation side is the more effort you put into, obviously, for example, learn the tool up front, understand the functionality, it then really does pay off in leaps and bounds when you do come to that implementation phase and making sure that you understand the way in which you also need to approach that implementation from a product perspective. I think also, and we'll again get into this shortly, but the preparation you put in up front ahead of that implementation, like for example, as you said, understanding what's in your agreements and the naming conventions and those things also then helps when you do go to implement to make sure that that's done in an efficient and a correct way, and you're not having to maybe unpick mistakes that you could have gotten ahead of if you had put that effort in up front. But yeah, we'll definitely look and start to talk a little bit more about the implementation phase and how we can actually make it as efficient as possible. So I know you both, again, did a lot of preparation in terms of actually getting ahead of implementation, not only because of the work you put up during the POC. Unfortunately, we're able to translate a lot of that as well into your customer environment once we'd obviously decide to go ahead with us. But what preparation specifically did you do, and what elements of that do you think really paid off?
One of the things that we did was we were in the middle of not really like a contract restructuring, but we were changing the way that we do a few things, the way that we, set out our orders. And if we were in a rush, I think that it very easily could have loaded those in. And instead we sort of took the time to say, let's really wait and make sure that what, garbage in, garbage out, let's make sure that what we put in there is exactly what we want. so that was like on the create side. On the repository side, I already touched on it, but like talking a lot about how we really want to set up our contract structure, our folder structure, um, naming conventions, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think good data in, spending time, and you can start this now, right? You could start just implementing a naming convention and renaming contracts wherever you have them saved right now, to make that clean when it goes in. And yeah, we had a little bit of a delay because as during implementation, we decided to change the way we price and redefine some terms. And so we had to provide the Summize implementation team with updated templates for them to like configure. And then it, was also end of Q2 for us. They're like waiting on me to give them all this stuff. But I'm glad we didn't like rush it and just use what we were still kind of using. It was like, no, let's just wait and get you all the right stuff and not implement with contracts that we're going to have to fix within 4 to 6 weeks. Instead, we kind of took a little bit of a pause. They were still doing stuff, but I was a little bit of a delay on that. But I'm glad
No,
we
but
did. I'm glad we did. Yeah.
it's an important point because as well, I think the fact that you both had done that thinking process up front, you knew you were going to change your templates. It meant that we were able to structure that implementation so that, as you mentioned, we're doing other pieces of work and getting other bits of functionality up and running ahead of until we had those templates that were then ready to go. And I
Yeah,
think,
we switched our sprints a little bit. We went a little out of order based on like best practices, but it was okay because it was, at our request and benefited us in the long run. So,
yeah, and I think just to touch on why that is so important that you do review your materials, etc., up front, because again, a lot of your Word documents, etc., you may have small piece of variable tags, etc., for where information needs to get populated. And if you're actually going and configuring those templates within your CLM, and then you change the whole document or the structure of it, etc., maybe a few months down the line, then you're only going to have to go back and redo all of that configuration as well. So again, really important when we're talking about adoption and false starts, for example. You don't want to necessarily be starting with templates that, again, that the business are going to have to change in a couple of months and maybe people won't be as used to that new process. Yeah. I think this is a really important question. And again, we say hindsight's 2020, but is there anything that looking back on that implementation process you would have done differently in your preparation for it?
Well, listen, it would have been nice, not to like pay for seats that we weren't using for a few months as we worked through that,
Mm.
groundwork process. Um, but the adoption that we have seen, I mean, it really went from slow and steady, slow and steady, slow and steady to we are, this is rolling out company wide, and the adoption was, I mean, I think that we had 2 users who didn't sign, who weren't actively using it within the first week. Um, and one of them was on paternity leave. So so even though that was sort of painful to know that you're paying for a service that not everybody's using yet, I do think that the groundwork that we laid made it so that by the time those seats were being used, they were actually being used because we built the tool in a way that made their jobs easier. Nobody likes a new tool. Nobody likes being told that you have to do something outside of just, they were very used to just slacking us and us responding. Like, how great that you can just slack your lawyers and they'll respond right away. And so it had to be something that they were still going to get quick responses on, because we knew that if we didn't build it in a way that they liked it, they wouldn't use it. And we would be once again paying for something that nobody was using. So I wouldn't say that I would have done it differently, but maybe just be aware of that if you want to do it well, that part might sting for a little while.
Yeah,
I think
that's important
I
to know.
mentioned earlier, you can start like cleaning up naming conventions and renaming stuff right away. We did a lot of that during the implementation, and we could have started that, you know, when we were looking for a CLM, right? We could have started that at just when we were doing POCs. So just like cleaning up, knowing where everything is, and naming things consistently across your business. Um,
Yeah, definitely. I
Like
think,
family trees, that was something that we didn't have set up that now on the back end, we did. So if you have the ability to do that, that would be very helpful to do now before you even get to the CLM point.
yeah, and you mentioned both of you that your founders prior to obviously going through this project were quite organized as well.
They
So
were.
it's interesting to show that even people that you consider to be organized and they're still in a great shape, you're still probably going to want to do some level of work on it to make sure it's as fit for purpose as possible. I think for those maybe in the audience or maybe that watch the recording that perhaps don't have a team that are as organized as your founders have been, are there any advice that you'd maybe provide to them?
I mean, if you can get somebody to like be dedicated to it, honestly, and a lot of this is just my own selfish experience, but if you are thinking about expanding your legal team, this is a great first project for that person because it allows them to have visibility into all your contracts, the way that you do things, to ask the right questions of why do we do it this way? Um, and also then, you have the resource who can help, you know, once it's implemented, we're still constantly adding new templates and new knowledge agents and things like that. And so whoever, I know that you could probably pay, somebody to do like professional services to do this, but it's also nice to have someone within the company who knows ongoing how to use the tool. But I also think that it would be difficult to just have someone from the outside come in and help. Um, but I don't know how reasonable that is to say, hey, hire somebody to do this.
Yeah. I think the sooner you get a CLM, the better in a company's journey. I know a lot of companies struggle to justify the cost when they're small, but they just get harder to implement. I've gone through implementations. I've used CLMs at prior roles, and they were implemented when companies were larger with a lot more contracts, and it didn't go great. It didn't go great. People didn't like using it. The data wasn't super great, and I think that just doing it when we were young but growing rapidly as a company and smaller made it a lot more manageable, and and then it's helped the legal team scale in size. And without it, we would have had to hire an additional legal resource, which we haven't had to do, but we would have had to do that if we wouldn't have had Summize over the last year.
And Summize is cheaper than hiring another lawyer. So
Even though I did have
Yeah.
to talk to my CEO about, well, can we just get like a contractor to do all these things? I was like, no, they will cost more money than
yeah.
the license fees. So
Yeah. And I would
Yeah.
just underline what Nicole said. But when we migrated all of our contracts into the repository at Summize, I can't remember how many we had at the time, but we have over doubled what we put in there to begin with. And the doubling of the number of contracts that have come in, every single one of those contracts is, linked family tree correctly. It has the correct naming conventions. We can go into Summize and grab, clause summaries so that if somebody says, hey, what does the contract say about this? A business person, a sales person can go into the clause summary and say, oh, this is what it says about whether or not we're allowed to use their logo, things like that. Um, when you're a lean legal team, it's helpful to have those self-service options for your internal clients because there's only two of us. We can't, when I first started, the number of times that our folks were coming to us saying, can we use this person's logo? Can we use this person's logo? Even just that they don't have to come ask us about that because it's in Summize.
Yeah, and I think that process and again the software that scales so much easier than bringing on contractors or additional heads to actually fill that as you are again expanding all across the business, not only just within your sales team too. We've had a question come through in the chat from Katya. Would you say that legal teams are the most appropriate teams to actually manage the CLM, or would you put it under a business team such as operations? Curious to hear, I think, both of your thoughts on that.
I think it probably depends on what you want from it. We wanted to make sure that, that really legal owned it. We're the ones who are generating the contracts and stuff. I think if you have like an operations team who is doing like contract management and things like that, that would make sense. Um, I don't know that there's really for us, it was definitely the legal team was the right team. But I think every company is different, so it sort of depends on who owns that area anyway.
Yeah, I've at the three tech companies where I've worked CLMs, legal's owned it twice, and then like a business ops team has owned it once. So I just think it depends on company structure. At Prosper Ops, it was clearly only going to be legal. We are when we implemented our CLM, we had 90 employees. So our ops team is customer facing, and they wear a lot of hats, as does the legal team. But that just wasn't a hat that we needed them to wear because we are going to be the biggest users of it. So
Yeah, massively. I think, again, if you're the ones that are going to be the biggest users, you need to be the experts, and you're also going to be the people that are driving process change, then I think it's great for legal to own that. Again, very considerate that there's a lot of different types of sectors and size of companies and industries that will use a CLM too, so that might not necessarily be right for them. But Katia, obviously, happy to talk more about it in detail if that'd be helpful. Next up, we've got what we can actually prepare to get ahead of that CLM project. And this is broken up into three separate areas that everyone can start doing to prepare. It doesn't just have to be legal, whether that's prior to your project beginning or also working alongside your implementation team as well. So just to run through, there's workflows, and we've spoken about this a little bit just to begin with. So making sure you're mapping out your current contracting processes, identifying the bottlenecks and those friction points across the businesses that might not just be in legal, but also finance, operations, etc. as well. Defining those approval authorities and making sure that we're conscious as to what that needs to look like when and if you're replicating that within your CLM process. And also then identifying those key sort of manual points as well within there that are ripe for automation. There's the data section of it too. So we've spoken at length about this, but understanding your contracts and where they live, centralizing them, identifying which ones you actually want to import. Not everyone will bring all their contracts into a CLM all at once. You may say, okay, let's start with our customer agreements. Maybe we need to start with our supplier agreements because actually we've been missing a lot of auto renewals and vendor management is a nightmare, for example. So there are ways even within this that you can segment it, but great to get ahead of and understand the real pain points within your organization, particularly focusing on final versions too. When you bring contracts into your repository, you don't necessarily need to bring all the red lines, etc. with them. You want to focus on the final signed versions. And like Molly mentioned before, that's because the data that you're putting into the repository as well is really important and will reflect the analytics and the data extraction that you can get out of it as well. And then project ownership too. So deciding who's going to own the implementation, which teams it's going to involve, and maybe where you may need to consult with them as well on those workflows. And then finally try and identify timelines as well. Now, the power of a pilot period. I know this is something that you both at Prosper Ops really focused on and covered as well. I think it'll be great to get your input into how you managed to get adoption seemingly so seamless and get everyone bought in, and a few tips for the audience as well about how to do that. But it's also really important to look at this in terms of preparing for that wider product launch across the organization. So who should you include in your pilot? Molly and Nicole, I'm curious to hear about who you included.
We included, we mostly use, I wouldn't say exclusively, but I would say the biggest users of Summize for us, other than legal, is our sales team. And so we chose a small group, I think it was about a dozen account executives who are the ones that always like ask the really smart questions, who really know our contract, who've been here long enough to know what works and what doesn't work. And so we included the ones that, not to say that like aren't problem children, but that always know the process that we had been using before and know the right process. So that if we introduced a new process, they could say, hey, this is something that worked in the old process really well. It's not working within Summize, or this works within Summize, but could be changed this way. And it was little things like we would ask them to generate a contract and they would point out, hey, we can't do X, Y, and Z within Summize, which we did do here. And sometimes that was a functionality thing, and we had to go back to Tom and say, can you, tweak this? And sometimes it was just, I made a mistake in setting up the template. But we needed to make sure that the folks that we included were the ones that were going to use it, because it was also uncomfortable. Like they were the only ones that we were asking to start using this tool while everybody else got to just Slack us directly, So we tried to use the ones that we knew were okay with being a little bit inconvenienced. And I will say those folks are like super users now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that feedback loop that you mentioned is so important. I think it's very easy, particularly as legal, to sit on one side of the fence and understand how it's going to benefit you and that process, but actually understanding how it's going to impact sales and maybe, again, those friction points that maybe it's going to introduce or not necessarily solve, and get them to think about it in a completely different way is really useful.
Yeah. We had a Slack group too for the pilot. So, and what was great is they would have questions and they would put it in the Slack group. And sometimes, Molly or I would need to answer it, but often they could answer it for each other, which was really cool to see. Like as they were using it more, they'd be like, "Oh, you need to click," and that was really great. But it was a very active pilot. And yeah, like Molly said, we picked the reps that we knew would give us like really thoughtful feedback. Like they would spend some time clicking around, making contracts, and then provide really thoughtful, helpful feedback, not just maybe complaining about it being different, which it's,
Yeah.
adapting new SaaS tools is difficult sometimes.
Definitely. I think change management's a huge part of that adoption phase and making sure that it's successful. Interesting about building those super users early too, even during the pilot phase, where you start to see that collaboration and people answering their own questions. That's only going to grow and almost be happening on the office floor when you roll it out wider. So being able to build those almost internal champions early on and have people that will go and answer people's questions when they pop up is so helpful, because again, this is designed to take a lot of this work off legal's plate as well. So if you're then being bombarded with 20 questions a day from across the sales floor as to how to drive things, then that can be an initial teething point as well.
Yeah. And one of the things about a POC is that you will hear the folks from the company talk in a lot of ways that make sense to them that don't necessarily make sense to you, because you're not living in a CLM every day at that point. Or maybe you are, but you're not living in this CLM. And so it got to the, so one of the things about, in the demos when Tom would show me, and then you can create, and then the repository, and then this, but then even just like talking about like workflows and things like that, it is different to see it than to actually do it. And so in our POC, then there would be these light bulb moments, right? Where I would think, oh, right, this is what Tom showed me in the demo. But, you're drinking from the fire hose at that point. I couldn't remember everything. And I think that then being in the POC for a while and then setting up the CLM before our trial our pilot group used it, I realized that I was sort of then doing the same thing to them, of talking about like, well, you have to do a create, you have to do a review, you have to do this. And they didn't know what any of that was. And so for them to also use that pilot period to sort of identify to me of, what does that mean? You're telling me that I have to do X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me what that means? And me sort of taking a minute to be like, okay, right. And I also created some guidance documents that were built off of the questions that pilot group was asking me. If I want to do this within Summize, how do I do it? And because I've been living in it, it's obvious to me how you would do that. But if our best AEs are going to be asking me this question, then someone who started 2 weeks ago is certainly going to be asking me that question. So I wanted to be able to have documentation to say, welcome to ProsperOps. This is our CLM. Here's some guidance documents for how to use it. And obviously we're continually updating that document, but the pilot group definitely helped us set a really good foundation for, this is Summize 101 as it relates to our use case.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think those sort of written materials, particularly as we're going through this adoption and change management process, are so useful for people to be able to rely back on, because again, a lot of the times people may reach out to you directly and immediately as soon as they start having issues. And if they then maybe can't go and find the answer elsewhere, because obviously as legal as well, you're super busy with the day job too. Then it's good that they don't necessarily have that frustration point as long as they can go and self-serve on the information themselves. Did you go about putting anything else together material-wise for that sort of adoption phase?
Well, I will say the Summize hub is incredibly helpful. There are so many videos and articles, and that's very helpful. But generally, when your internal clients have a question about the CLM, they want to know how it applies directly to your company, right? So yes, you can go into the Summize hub and see, how do you delete a file or how do you rename something? But our folks want to know, how do I set up tiered pricing for? And there's not something specific to how we do that.
Yeah.
And so it really was, as our pilot group asked questions, we have different, like, here's a document on how to create this kind of an order. Here's a document on how to create this kind of an order. Here's if this, then that, with respect to, like, if you got red lines, what sort of workflow do you get? So yeah, we have quite a few. I want to say like 6 different documents that here's how you do integrations with all of our different tools, things like that.
We also do trainings and record them so people can go back and watch and reference those. And then we just recently did a refresher training. It was also new training for some new hires, but a refresher, like some good hygiene uses of CLM of the tool, and record those. So, and when we first rolled it out, obviously we had the pilot group who were big cheerleaders and fans of the tool. So they encouraged their peers in sales and partner team to use the tool. And Molly and I made ourselves very available to, hey, we'll jump on a Zoom and I can help you. I can walk through that first request with you or that first create with you, and just being available to make that process really seamless for them, and not have them feel like I should understand this. They did that. They offered those several trainings that I joined, but they might not have needed to create a contract for 30 days from when we did that training, and they kind of forget. So just saying like, hey, we're available. Let's jump on a Zoom. Um, so I think that helped as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, a lot of the times and reasons why legal teams are looking to bring CLMs on board is not only to make their lives easier, but also to help with that reputation almost of legal as being quite often seen as the bottleneck, and make sure they're streamlining that and really boosting the department to show the true value of them. And I think making yourselves available to go through that almost hand-holding process to make sure that all goes smoothly, I think it only seems to add to that reputation and makes you look like superstars in front of the rest of the business. So well done. When it came to training as well, what type of approach did you take? I'm conscious from our side of things, we see all different shapes and sizes of training sessions, whether that's mass webinars, whether that's in-person meetings. How did you run that? And again, is there any sort of learnings from that?
Well, we're a fully remote company, so we did. We did a couple of trainings where where our CSM was on the webinar. But it was just a Zoom where we shared, I shared my screen, folks could ask questions. We went through piece by piece, basic, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, this is where you find this, real-time questions being asked. And especially in the very beginning, when the CLM was also new to me and Nicole, even though we'd been in it for a few months, there were some questions in those initial trainings where we didn't know the answer. And it was a great opportunity for us to go back and find out what the answer was and learn about it. One of the things too that's been sort of surprising, I guess, because I spend so much time. I mean, I feel like I basically live in Summize because this is now our legal front door. It's our where we do our day-to-day job. It's just how many things I don't know. Like Nicole, just last week, I was sharing my screen and doing something within Summize, and she pointed out, "Oh, that's how you do it. Don't you know that there's an easier way to do it? You just click this button." And it's just and our AEs have also reached out and said like, "Oh, did you know that you can do this in Summize?" And I had no idea. So that didn't directly answer your question, but has been refreshing and a refreshing surprise.
Yeah. What we'll learn is training's ongoing. It doesn't just stop after you leave
True.
that Zoom meeting, I think.
No, yeah, training's always ongoing. We're adding new products, which then it's a new template, a new way of contracting, then training the sales team on that create template. Yeah, so it's definitely always ongoing. We also
One
made sure
thing,
to
oh, go
not
ahead.
make everyone use it at the end of a quarter where we are a
Yes.
quarter, end of quarter is very busy from a sales perspective. So we had our pilot group using it. And then we, on October 1, which our quarter ended September 30, we're like, all right, everyone, now you need to use this. And we removed all the other templates from G Drive so they couldn't find them and it kind of forced them to the tool. But we just made sure to not disrupt like some of our busier times of the year, and kind of make that a little bit more seamless.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point though to have the foresight of the last thing people need when it is a stressful end of quarter as well is to then have to go through a completely different process, and then with all the other time pressures etc that go on, you probably don't have the bandwidth to afford to go and ask a question and things like that. So it's great that you identified that.
Yep.
Molly, did you have something else to say as well, by the way?
No, the only other thing that I was going to say, previously when you asked, if there was anything that you would have done differently, um, I do think that there was so much to learn in the day to day, and Summize is really good at helping with the build out of templates that I definitely did fail on really learning how to self-service the build element, which is actually pretty, I wouldn't say it's self-explanatory, but there's so many resources on the Summize Hub that has been helpful. But that is something that I'm catching up on now, that anytime I see something that can be automated, just yesterday, I got 4 contract requests for the same thing. And I was like, I'm just going to build a template. I'm just going to build this. And some of them are much harder than others. There's one that's been sitting on my plate for 2 months now that I just keep, I'm doing something wrong on it. But most of it is really easy and has made it so that, listen, it takes me and Nicole 2 minutes to make this one change, but now that it's built, it's going to take us no time. And so that I wouldn't even necessarily say that I wish I would have done it differently, because you can only ingest enough information and enough projects at one time. And you guys made it easy that I didn't have to pay attention to build. But I do think that I sort of had the ostrich head in the sand thinking of, I'm not going to have to build, like we're building it out now, so it'll be fine. And yes, it's true. We haven't really changed our templates very much, like our day-to-day orders, but I am finding use cases for other things that I can build in there that will make life easier for us. And so probably should have paid attention to that. But yeah, there's just always something that you can learn with it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
that's
that
fine.
I think that kind of one thing that I didn't mention earlier when we were looking at CLMs, kind of what was important, what was painful, but also and this is also to like what Katia asked about ownership, is we were going to be owning that, a team of 2, work at a tech company, but I'm not going to act like I'm a software engineer at all. And so we wanted a CLM that was very user friendly and had incredible support, because I was like, I'm going to need the support. And Molly's talked about the hub, but also the account management team, our support team at Summize is phenomenal and so uber responsive. Um, we do try to do a lot on our own because it's good for us to learn and understand, but we could also just send it and say, hey, could you help with this? But we try to, take ownership and learn these things. So that was something when we were evaluating them. And I went on G2 and read a bunch of reviews and was looking at who was scoring really high with their customers from ongoing support post implementation.
Yeah, I
And
think
yeah, like if you have somebody who's great at coding and things like that, you might not need one that is so, you might not need a CLM that is so intuitive, I guess, for a couple of tech lawyers who are not techie. But that was a strong requirement on our end.
It was. We did some demos where I was like, you're not even writing in plain English words right
Yeah.
now to create a template. I will never learn that. So, I think that was super, super important to us.
Yeah, I think it's great. Sites like G2 are great resources to actually show what customer bases are saying. People that have been there, used the product, been through that implementation process as well. So they're great, not only to find almost tips and recommendations as well, but also that lived experience. Molly, on that template, send it across or let us know, because we'll have another training session with you on
Perfect. I'm gonna take you
it.
up on that.
You can. That's absolutely fine. Perfect. I know we're running shortly to a close, so we'd like to do another quick pulse check now that we've actually gone through a lot of the material on today's call. What support do you think would be most helpful when actually rolling out your CLM? So once you decide to pull the trigger or go ahead with that project, what do you think are some materials that would be most useful to you and the business? I'll just give you another 20 seconds or so to answer that. We've covered, I think, a lot of the answers and the benefits and the approaches that you can take. There probably isn't one that is, again, you'd like to rely on entirely. You probably want a multitude of these different options, but always useful, I think, to understand what the audience is saying in relation to those. We've ran some training sessions where, again, very different. Some people want you in the room and very hands-on and almost half a day of training and take it all in at once. Some people want it drip fed through webinars and weekly sessions. And then we've rolled out previously to investment banks and people like that, where it's like, oh, well, people aren't going to read this, so we need to actually just create them a video, send that across, and then that's the extent of the training that we'll deliver. So everyone takes it in different ways, and there's a lot of different optionality that I think makes it right for your organization or not. Perfect. I think if we roll that poll to a close. Amazing. So I think 50% of people understandably want the product experts to actually drive that. I could see quite a few people would also like to go through that structured pilot process too, and then also training videos and the launch materials as well. So thank you for your participation in that. Finally, I know that we've got 5 or so minutes as well set aside for Q&A. Katya's kindly put a question in from before, but very curious to see if the audience has any more questions, particularly from the 2 experts we've got on the call that have been through this process you might be thinking of undertaking as well. So please do put questions in. There's no such thing as anything too silly.
One other thing we did, and while people are thinking about their very good questions to ask us, is I had our head of sales and we had RevOps join demos when we narrowed it down, Molly mainly, but went from, looking at like 50 CLM providers down to 3, and we had them do demos with our head of sales and RevOps to get their feedback on what they thought. And then the native integrations with the tools we were using was super important as well with our CRM. And then with Slack, and yep, it was super important from their perspective, right? They wanted their sellers to stay in the CRM.
Definitely, I think engaging other stakeholders as early on as possible, not only does it make them feel a little bit more involved when it comes to that decision making, the change that's coming, but again, like we said about identifying those pain points during implementation, you almost also get their pain points from a decision standpoint as well when you're choosing that vendor. Katya, thank you very much for your question. Were you able to implement a due diligence process within your CLM? I don't know if either of you have been through that.
So we went through due diligence. We were acquired at the end of the year. It was announced I don't think we announced it until January 6th. But so yes, we did. It was incredibly helpful during diligence and during scheduling for the purchase agreement. So yeah, super helpful.
And I think that circles back to the, when is the right time to implement a CLM? We were a small company, and while we definitely did not implement the CLM in preparation of being acquired, it was phenomenal. I don't know how we would have done it without having a CLM in place, because it was so helpful to be able to run reports in response to diligence questions. And if had we gotten much bigger and had not yet been acquired, it would have been harder to implement a CLM, but also at that point, it almost feels too late. Why implement it just, for that goal?
Yeah, for sure. We have had quite a lot of customers, obviously, that have gone through acquisitions or mergers as well to use the repository functionality for that due diligence process. We even had one customer literally signed on 2 weeks before they knew they were going to have to go through that process and rush to get all their contracts in within the space of a few days to extract that information. So massive cost saving, I think, not only if you were to go and hire external counsel to help you do those due diligence processes, but also getting everything in an orderly fashion ready for when those new investors or whoever it is comes on board as well.
Yep. Oh yeah, we were purchased by a company called Flexair. I mean, y'all can Google this. None of this it's in our logo now. But while we have a lot fewer contracts than they have, we're so organized. They're just like, it's beautiful. Y'all know where everything is. You know what every contract says. So.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, Katya has a different question related to diligence. So like for onboarding,
Yeah, so we set up workflows for, so the question is about screening vendors. We said there are different, and this was the case with all of the CLM providers that different like tasks and permissions. And so for our vendors, for instance, we set up a workflow wherein, it doesn't even come, it will be submitted into Summize, and it does not even notify me and Nicole for a legal review until finance has been pinged within Summize and they have approved the budget for it. And so it just adds some checks and balances so that Nicole and I aren't wasting our time on something that finance comes back and says, no, you don't even have the budget for that to begin with.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, yeah, Katya might be asking about your like vendor onboarding, like questionnaires, like diligence on your potential suppliers and having them log in to do diligence on them. Maybe if that's the question, we don't use it in that fashion. We don't actually engage that many vendors outside of like marketing sponsorship type stuff. So we don't use it in that fashion. I haven't had the need. I don't know if it would have that capability, Tom. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of people use it, as you mentioned, in terms of that intake process for new suppliers, capturing those questions that maybe your procurement team are only going to have to go and ask further down the line. But where we see the most value, I think, is that internal process of approvals and for, again, almost staggering those approvals as well. So again, legal aren't getting bothered with it until spend has been confirmed or not. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can add approvals during mid-negotiation too, which is really nice. If a customer or supplier puts something in a contract where we're like, spend is approved, but I want the BU owner, the VP to approve this other whatever it is. I want marketing to approve. They would like to disclose us as a customer. We want our marketing team to approve that. We can add mid, workflow like, oh, wait, we want marketing to approve this now, and then we're capturing those approvals. It's not just in someone's Slack or email on a phone call. We're capturing those. It's auditable to say, oh, this is who approved it and here's when they approved it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think centralizing all those conversations, approvals, etc., also pays dividends if it ever comes up in 6 months' time and you're not having to scramble through all your emails or Slacks or wherever those approvals live to actually find that. I've noticed, I think we are at time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I'd also like to really thank both you, Molly and Nicole, for so much insight and all the great things that you've had to say on here. I think our audience will have found all your, not only talking through your selection process, but also your implementation recommendations and that pilot phase to it. I think that's so useful and practical insights that you really do just struggle to find elsewhere. So thank you very much for that. Everyone that's attended, you'll receive a webinar recording shortly after the end of this call and some helpful resources in addition to that in case you ever do want to, again, revisit some of these when the implementation process is about to kick off or you come to choosing a CLM vendor. So thank you very much, everyone. We're going to end the call now, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care, both. Great to see you again.